So let me go ahead and do that. All right. So Chaplain Hughes, he is also a sworn police chaplain for the San Francisco Police Department and a hospice chaplain for a Sarah Care hospice as well. Chaplain Hughes is a musician, he's a guitarist, and has been on several recordings. He hails from Chicago, Alabama, and Yountville, California. Chaplain Hughes believes it's not about religion, but it's about relationships. And he already said that tonight. He's committed to providing spiritual and emotional support to not only patients, but anyone in need. He believes no matter how bad the storm may be, you will come out. He's committed to providing compassionate listening and encouragement to anyone in need. So we welcome you, Pastor Hughes.
Thank you.
Next we have Diane Weber. She is a Jewish woman who has a long and diverse history practicing her religion. She is a child of 2 Holocaust survivors who fled Nazi Germany while the remainder of the family perished. Growing up with both parents who experienced those horrors gives her a unique perspective of life. Diane is a licensed clinical social worker, as many of the second generation are, one of the helping professions. Diane's therapy work has a special emphasis towards trauma work and survivor's guilt. During free time, Diane enjoys the outdoors no matter the season, spending time with her children and grandchildren, walking her dog, and working in the garden. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have the Reverend Dr. David Bocock. And Pastor Bo was born and raised in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, having served in the Gulf War. He was ordained into the ministry in the United Church of Christ in 2001 and has served churches in New York City and northern and southern New Jersey before moving to Sacramento. Although he was ordained in the United Church of Christ, his faith, perspective, and zeal for ministry were influenced by a variety of mainline faith traditions, as well as the military chaplaincy, where he served as a chapel manager. He believes that we can know God and be known of God. This is accomplished in a variety of ways through worship, personal devotion, spiritual growth, and service to others. So welcome, Bo, to our gathering. All right, so I will turn it over to our moderator, David Katz, who is also a member of the Interfaith Council. Take it away, Dave. David.
Thank you very much, Serene. I want to express my appreciation to our panelists for taking the time to be with us tonight, and to those in the audience. We will have, I'm going to just repeat what I told the panelists previously. We'll have each panelist present their point of view on the topic for tonight, which is miracles, do they exist? Each panelist will have 10 minutes. Then we'll have a time when the panelists can ask each other questions or add points that they took from other panelists and expand on them. And then the last half hour from 8 to 8:30, people in the audience who submit questions through the chat function of Zoom, I will choose as many of the questions as I can and read them to the panelists for their response. So anytime during this panel presentation that people in the audience would like to enter questions in the chat, feel free to do so, and we'll try to address them the last half hour of our event. So just briefly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is David Katz. I'm retired. I'm a retired family physician. I have been on the board of the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento for, I think, 4 years, a little bit more than 4 years. And my spiritual roots began in my family as a Jewish family. I grew up Jewish and had the usual milestones in education when I was a child. Gradually, I've also expanded to add to Judaism experiences with Sufism and mystical Islam. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I am no longer practicing as a family doctor, but um, that also has been a major part of my formative life, has been all my experiences with my patients, with them as people, and with the bodily and spiritual ills that come to anyone who's born into this world. So um, I bring that to the Interfaith Council. I am not a clergyman, so that's I bow to those that take that on their shoulders, and we'll hopefully get some insights from that point of view. So I've already started this session by not doing what I said, which was getting an order for each speaker. So I wonder if we could just go with the order of the introductions. Pastor Bo, if you could start, and then Diane. And well, was that the way it went? No, I'm not sure. Was it Pastor Ken, and
I
then
can be any.
Diane?
I can be any. I can be last if you want me to. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, the first shall be last, right? So how about if you start us off, and then we'll go Diane, and then Pastor Bo, if that would be okay.
It's fine with me.
Okay, so your point of departure is miracles. Are they real? Do they happen?
I believe it happened. I'm a recipient of miracles. And I actually, being a chaplain here, chaplain manager at Kaiser in Roseville, I've seen miracles take place over and over again. Yeah, and a lot of times we look at miracles and we think it always has to be something that we want or some good thing. I believe God provides miracles and how He sees fit. Earlier when I said that I'm a miracle, um, I was born. My mom had me when she was 7 months pregnant in Chicago. I wasn't born in the hospital. I was born in a church in Chicago, and the miracle is I had a twin brother. My twin brother came out. He was stillborn, but I survived. And so I should not have survived, but I did survive. And so just that by itself was a miracle. I found out about this years later. But just that by itself is a miracle. Since then, I've seen God perform miracles, whether it's healing someone, whether it's maybe a financial miracle, or maybe just the miracle of somebody just having peace within themselves. A lot of times we don't think that having a peace of mind is a miracle. When you look at the things that we deal with in our society nowadays, if you can have peace of mind, to me, that's a miracle. And I like to tell people, if you really want to see a miracle, just take a look in the mirror, and a miracle be staring right back at you, because nobody tells their heart to keep beating. Nobody, and you're a doctor, so you know this. God allows our heart to beat. And so I believe in miracles. I believe God can do anything He wants. I believe all we got to do is trust Him and put it in His hands. One of the main things I've learned, I know I may look 29 years old, but I'm 59 years old. So one of the main things I've learned, and this just been over the last few years, is not to worry about anything. That does not mean I don't get concerned about things, but it means that I don't worry about things, because worrying does not change the situation. It does not, it'll make me worse, it'll make me sick or something like that. but it won't change my situation. The miracle of me not worrying about things is I turn it over to God, who's able to do anything. Now, that's my belief, and I know we live in a society where there's different religious beliefs. And whoever you call your God is, again, being a chaplain, I have to talk to all type of religions. One miracle in particular I want to bring up. I was going through I got about 2 or 3 more minutes, I think. Y'all messed up letting the pastor be the one to preach. We better start talking because we don't know how to shut up. So I'm sure Pastor Bo will tell you that. So um, I was doing my residency at Kaiser in Vallejo, and I got called to a room. Of course, I had the chaplain thing on. We got called to this room, and I go into the room, and this patient, a young lady, she was suffering from an illness, a detrimental illness, and she was close to death. But the girl looked at me and stared me down. And if looks can kill, I would be dead right now because she saw the chaplain thing. Then her husband was in the room and the 2 kids were in the room. So the husband says to me, "We're atheists and we're not believers." And I told him, "I'm not here to preach a sermon to you. I'm just here to be here with y'all." So I left, get called to the exact same room the very next day. And I get on the elevator, and another woman gets on with me. She sees my chaplain thing, and she talks about Jesus all the way up on the elevator. I noticed that we getting off on the same floor, heading in the same direction, and stopping at the exact same room. It ended up being that young lady's mother. And so now the mother is a Christian, but the daughter is an atheist. So she put her hand on me and she said, "I got to tell you," her exact words to me is, "Baby, I got to tell you, they're atheists and they're not believers." And I told her, "Trust me, I got this. I've been here yesterday." So I go into the room, and this time the young lady is actively dying. And so the husband looks at me and asks me, "Is there anything I can do?" I said, "All I can do is just pray." I started praying. Her mom, she started, she had me by the hand, and I'm praying. And by the time I got through praying, this same atheist woman was looking up toward the ceiling saying, "Thank you, Jesus." Then she looked at her husband and kids and told them that she loved them, looked at me, told me, thanked me for being there, looked at her mom and told her she loved her. And 15 minutes later, she was gone. So he was an atheist that did not believe, but at the last few moments of her life, she saw Christ. To me, that's a miracle that he showed himself to her. I didn't see him, I just prayed, but she saw him. And so and God can perform miracles in any way. So that all depends on how you believe. Jesus said in the Bible that if you have faith as small as a grain of mustard seed, you can move mountains out of your life. So that's the sermon for me for the night. I know I got 10 minutes, so I'll stop right there. So.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate it. Diane?
Sure. Ken, you had just said, I think when you first started, you said, sometimes just even looking in the mirror, you see a miracle, right? And so for me, I think about I have a son and I have a daughter. They're both grown. And I think about looking in their faces all the way from, even before they were born. As a mom, we know, we have that connection with our children. Seeing their faces as they grow and become adults, right? To me, that's a miracle. The glow, the shine, the life that they are, right? That to me is a definite way of looking at miracles. And I mean, I don't necessarily see miracles as like big grandiose things like reading into big things like after it rains and the rainbow, even though that is a most beautiful thing, but little things that help me have this wonderful life. And what I say, maybe I shouldn't even say little things, but everyday things. This I'll take, for instance, this spring season with hearing the birds and the different birds that are coming back that migrate and hearing them sing when I go outside in the morning. Listening to the rain when it patters on the roof of the house. So maybe not so much little things, but Mother Nature is being incorporated into these miraculous things that maybe scientists know how to explain, but I see as miracles. I think about maybe, historically, the way I was raised, as you had said in the intro, both my parents were Holocaust survivors. And so they were Jewish, and that was the reasons why my father was arrested. My father was not a religious, he didn't come from a religious family. They came from a very secular German family, but he got arrested nonetheless because that was the law back then. And so as children were born, unfortunately, some children died, as we know. There were 33 family members, immediate family members of mine, who didn't survive the Holocaust. My mom was the only person in her family. My father was the only person in his family. So eventually they got to the United States, and here I am born. They had left and spent 8 years in Shanghai, China, which there were about 20,000 Jews that were able to escape the Holocaust and get there. So they met this couple who couldn't have children. And so when they got to the United States and I was born, I was sent to live with this couple who were Orthodox. So mind you, we kept kosher. We went to Shabbat services Saturday mornings. We didn't, we kept, 2 sets of dishes and actually a third set for Passover. So we were very religious. On the other hand, my father not only was secular, but then after the war, a lot of people, as you said, Ken, my father became atheist. He could never reconcile his relationship with God and how something like that he observed that could happen. So it was interesting as a child for me to grow up with parents who I would spend the summer with that totally, there was no Shabbat, there was no candles, there was no synagogue, there was no talk of God, because the only thing, they didn't want to say anything bad about God, but they couldn't say anything good, so they said nothing. Right? And then during the school year, I'm going to a religious day school on top of living this really religious life. So it gave me this really interesting way of kind of bringing it all together as an adult, saying, okay, how do I see my faith? How do I see my way in regards to my relationship, with anything, with God, with the higher power, with my own faith. And it did take me a while to find my comfort. And I find that I do find miracles and comfort going to synagogue. I am what we call Reform. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Judaism. There's different forms of Judaism. I consider myself Reform. So women can hold the Torah. I think the first time I held the Torah, I cried and cried and cried and cried. It was such an emotional event for me. So let me know if I'm, you were talking about going over your 10 minutes. I'm not paying attention to time whatsoever. So just let me know if I'm exceeding my time. And so, I also look at my faith in terms of my values. So for me, they're almost like one and the same. I don't consider myself a religious person, even though I do go to synagogue every Friday night. I consider myself a person who lives a valued life, right? That values humans, that values people's right to be, to have different religions and different perspectives. That the old, the saying, live and let live, right? When I was a child, I had a lot of questions and nobody could answer those questions in regards to my faith. So I did have some struggles as a teenager and a younger person. Now I think about how I have this discussion and I can ask questions and there's other perspectives, and I love the input and I love the communication. And it gives me a great way to have thoughtful conversations with a lot of different people.
Wow, Thank you so much, Diane. Pastor Bo, you're muted.
Thank you, Diane. You said something that made me say, "Oh, I should write that down." You said something that enacted a memory. So this is like we're here upon the Easter season in the Christian tradition, right? And we're all about, this is Holy Week, and we're about to celebrate Easter Sunday. And Friday is Good Friday in many traditions, and our church is joining up with a Methodist church to have an ecumenical Good Friday service. And that service is, the depressing side of the Christian story, where Jesus gets arrested and he dies and he gets killed. He's put into a tomb. And then on Easter morning, Jesus rises from the dead, right? And this is that time of year in which everybody who goes to church or is a part of the church tradition, or even a little bit, recognizes this great miracle that Jesus rose from the dead. And and everybody is supposed to believe this, right? This great, big, amazing miracle. And even if nobody gets it, nobody understands it, it's like clicking off that terms of belief when you download software. You don't really read it. You just say, I agree, right? And so regardless of whether you're a longtime church attender or infrequent church attender, you celebrate and observe this thing called resurrection. And for us in the Christian tradition, that is a big, big miracle. And for a lot of people, it's the basis by which our faith exists. And yet we're just challenged with this big miracle, and how on earth can we possibly believe it? I went online and went to different dictionaries to define miracle. And every definition that I came up with defined a miracle as this big thing that, let me just read to you just a couple of definitions. It's a miracle is a surprising and welcome event that is not understood by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. Webster says that it's an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. Miracles are by definition then part of the divine order of events. And so, when we talk about miracles, God is a part of that process. We can talk about amazing things happening that we can't explain, and maybe there's a word for that. But when it comes to miracle, there's always an angle or a perspective that brings God into the conversation. When we look into the Bible, we see a lot of examples in the Old Testament and the New Testament of miracles. We see the Jews wandering in the wilderness, and God provides manna from heaven. That's a miracle. Or maybe the pourable water fountain that follows them along, or the parting of the Red Sea, or Elisha being taken up to heaven. In the New Testament, Jesus heals people and casts out demons, and even feeds 5,000 people with just a handful of bread and fish. It's considered a miracle. And so some people take these stories, because we've been taught to them since we were children, as, oh, that's absolutely true. And, if you're not deeply religious, maybe you say, well, if that's what you say happened, I'll believe it. Some people go, well, really? Could that really happen? I was talking with a friend of mine, and he had this great explanation for the feeding of the 5,000. Maybe you've heard it too. And what it does is it tries to take the mysterious out of the miracle. In that particular story, a friend of mine suggests that what if everybody who followed Jesus out for that day had brought some food with them? And what if the disciples had collected all of the food that everybody brought and then redistributed it so that everybody had enough, and they would have enough left over? And I remember, what a great way to explain away this miracle, to explain how the feeding of the 5,000 could possibly have happened. And so, because some people just can't believe in the supernatural, and some people can. They don't quite understand why, but in a couple of weeks, our lectionary reading takes us to doubting Thomas, that disciple that just couldn't believe that Jesus was really Jesus until he touched him and felt his hands, right? Well, he wasn't really a doubter. He was just skeptic. He says, I'm not going to believe until I touch. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just how he's made. Some people can believe in the miraculous. I prayed for that parking spot in front of the department store to open up, and sure enough, I found a place to park. Some people can believe that really easily, as if God has nothing else to do but find you a parking spot, right? Or some people can't and think that it's a complete joke. And my family is a great example of some people who believe in things and miracles and the supernatural, and some who don't. And let me tell you a story that that's a part of my life, and I'll try to be quick here. My daddy never went to church as long as I knew, except once. But throughout my life, my daddy didn't go to church. My mother didn't go to church because my daddy didn't go to church. My brothers didn't go to church either. And yet here I am, this church nerd. Where does that come from? Well, an event happened before I was born. My mother was feeling really, really sick, and she went to the doctor, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. And she was given not very long to live. She had a team of about 5 or 7, 10 doctors, depending on who tells the story. Years later, there were more doctors present, and they did a lot of medical tests on her, and they concluded that she had leukemia. They were going to start treatment for her, but probably she shouldn't even need to do it because it was so bad. And she goes home. She's sad. She's in her early 30s. She thinks that, gosh, I'm too young to die. I've got 2 young boys at home. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair. And she remembers, as she would later retell it, she was laying in bed and she says, Lord, if this is something that you want, I'm very disappointed, but I submit and surrender myself to whatever it is you want to do. You want to heal me? You want me to die? It's all up to you. And suddenly her body is aflame. She's on fire. She cried out to my dad, Charlie! And Dad came in and he goes, what's wrong? He goes, I'm on fire. And boy, they thought it was the end. And so Daddy picked her up, took her in the car, took her to the hospital at St. Anthony's. And they brought her in, and the doctors all swarmed around her, and they did a lot of tests. She was in the hospital for a couple of days. And the doctors came in after the end of that, and they walked in the room, and they were stunned. And they were amazed. They couldn't quite explain it. But they said, Betty, my mom that was her name, we can't explain what just happened, but you don't have leukemia anymore. And Mama was, what? And so to Mother, she was healed by God. My daddy was so angry that if there was a God to put her through this, he never went to church. He says, I'm not going to go back to church because of this. This is horrible. My brothers, I would later learn, because they would tell me, they couldn't possibly believe it. They think the doctors made a mistake, that all those tests were wrong. They got her confused with somebody else. And so it wasn't, I don't know, 6 months ago, I was talking to my brother, I think my eldest brother, he's almost 70. And I was recounting to him this story about, well, what happened exactly with Mother's leukemia? He reiterated, it couldn't possibly have happened. And, being the youngest, I'm the youngest of my brothers, and I like to poke my brothers because, I'm the golden child. I got away with murder. I can do anything I want. And I would say, well, the reason why Mother survived is I wasn't born yet. And he says, you cocky little person, you. But as I think about this story, I wonder why my mother got sick, if there's a divine explanation. I wonder why she was healed, if indeed she was healed. And I wonder about my role in it and how it totally increased my faith as I heard those stories. And maybe it made me more open to the idea that God does work in mysterious and wonderful ways. And so later in my teenage years, I would attend a Methodist church, then a Baptist church. I got involved in a charismatic group. Oh my gosh, that was hilarious and fun. And I was a part of a deliverance ministry. And it scared the bejesus out of me. And I got out of the deliverance ministry. If you're familiar with that, it's more like exorcisms, right? And it just scared me to death. but it opened my mind to the many different ways in which God reveals the God self to us. And then I found the United Church of Christ where I'm at now. Well, then I was in the military, and I was surrounded by people of all different faith traditions who looked at God in different ways. And the more I talked with people, and the more I heard their stories of faith, the more it inspired my stories of faith. And then I discovered something really interesting, a connection that people who stayed connected with the divine, those who went to church, those who read their Bibles, those who heard different stories, believed miracle stories more easily than people who stop going to church, who don't dig into their faith possibilities, who look at stories like this as fantastical or mythical. About 6 months ago, I participated in a conversation of process theologians. Process theology is a kind of theology that says God does not coerce people into doing or believing things. And process theologians are often made up of people who used to believe but don't really believe anymore, but still want to believe. They want to believe in some type of divine, but they kind of take away the miracle or the miraculous because they're level-headed thinking. Kind of like Thomas Jefferson and deism, who says, well, who ripped up parts of his Bible because he couldn't find he could believe in the miracles anymore, but he still wanted to believe in something. And I was a part of this group of people, and they were talking about God in this very abstract kind of way. And so I asked all the participants that I was with, and I said, how many of y'all go to church? And you know what? Not a single person on that panel went to church. And I'm not saying you have to go to church to believe, but it makes believing easier. When you hang out with other people of faith who share your values, it makes believing easier. And so here's my point. I believe in miracles, sort of, kind of. I don't always understand how they happen or when they're going to happen, but my faith tradition teaches them. My friends who believe in it. I read stories and booklets from like Upper Room that tell stories of people who've died and come back. I've talked to, actually, because I'm a church pastor, I talked to a lot of people who've had near-death experiences. And you hear their stories, and gosh, a little of you isn't as afraid of death as it was before you talked to them. There's something about this connection between miracles and keeping connected to the divine. And the more I go to church, the more I read the Bible, the more I talk with my friends of faith, the easier it is to believe that miracles do happen. And I kind of want them to happen. I don't know if I'm ever going to get that parking spot in front of the supermarket or the department store, but I think God's got more important things to do than find me a spot. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to say, hey, if something opens up, if you've got the time. But I'm also going to believe that when I'm praying with a church member who's facing a scary diagnosis, I'm going to believe that God can intervene if God so desires.
Wow, thank you so much, Pastor Bo.
You're welcome.
If you'll bear with me, I'd like to add a few things to the conversation, because this has been a very, very powerful experience to listen to the three of you for me. One of them is a joke that I heard when I was a kid, which was about the little boy who goes to Sunday school, and then when he comes home, his mother asks him, well, what did they teach you today? And he said, well, we learned about how the Hebrews escaped from Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea. And mom says, well, tell me the story. And he said, well, they had to run as fast as they could to get away from the Pharaoh. And then once they got to the Red Sea, they put their pontoon bridges in, and they built this pontoon bridge, and they went across as fast as they could, and then they pulled the pontoons back. And his mother said, well, Johnny, that's really not the way I heard the story. And he said, well, Mom, if I told you what they told me, you wouldn't believe it. And so that was, one of the things about miracles that you know, that kind of reflects a little bit what each of the three of you have talked about, you know, being in a world where there are strong believers and there are atheists. And that's just a fact of life. Whether you're an atheist or you're a believer, you're in a world that's like that. The other is not a joke. It was an actual experience I had when I was in middle school. I had a crush on this girl, and I was from a Jewish background, and she was from a Lutheran Christian background, and I used to walk her home. And so one time I said, you know, Beth, I never have understood, what do they mean by the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost? What is that? Is that three people, or is that all God, or what are they talking about? And she said, well, it's three, I forget how she said it exactly, but it's kind of like three people and it's all God at the same time. And I said, well, I don't understand that. And she said, well, I don't understand it either, but faith is believing things that are unbelievable, that can't happen, you know. And so I got in my head at that time, and at the developmental stage I was at, well, the more impossible thing that somebody tells you, if you say you believe it, that shows you have more faith. Like if they say, well, if I drive off this cliff, God's not going to make the car fall down with gravity and crash and kill me. And then you believe that, that shows you have a lot of faith. And so it didn't really make me have faith. It made me think that faith meant that you believed things that couldn't happen. But later on, I met some people that pointed out that the fault in that way of thinking is that the whole point is what your mind and your intellect can understand and express, and that is not the whole point. We can only understand with our intellect and express very little of what happens in life. And the rest of it is a mystery. It's a miracle. It's beyond expression and beyond our mind to get it to wrap itself around. And I certainly came across that in my medical practice. There was once a case. It was the mother of my office manager, and she was in her 80s, and she got very sick, and I put her in the hospital. I took her to the emergency room. It turned out that she had a diverticulitis that ruptured her colon, and she was in her 80s, and she had to be taken to surgery on an emergency basis. It was life or death. We had to go right into surgery. So, you know, we started antibiotics, and I went in with the surgeon and to assist him. And it was an inexpressible mess when we opened up her abdomen. I don't want to gross anybody out, but it was just everything that should be in the bowels was not in the bowels anymore, and all over the place where it shouldn't be. And so, you know, we, under the guidance of this very good surgeon, we cleaned everything out and rinsed everything off and sewed the ruptured bowel up, and then went to the she went to the intensive care unit, and then we went out to talk with the family. And the surgeon did most of the talking, and he just explained that at her age, with all these bacteria inside of her body, and certainly had been able to get into her bloodstream by then, the chances of her surviving were almost none. So please go see your mom, and but don't expect too much. And having been there and actually seen how bad it was, you can imagine my surprise when 6 months later I got a postcard from her from Florida, thanking me and saying she was feeling fine. And she got exactly the same treatment, emergency surgery and antibiotics and getting everything sewn back together, and as 1,000 other people. So it made me think, well, how could this be? What happened? And I have to say, I can't understand with my intellect what happened. There's not a way. I knew this person. She was my patient. And we mourned her for a week in the hospital. And then here she is, back to normal, tough as nails, sending postcards. So it taught me there's a lot more than what I can understand. And there's a lot more that's not seen happening at all times. So I really liked the comments that each of you made about looking for the divine or looking for God in what's happening. It's almost like miracles are like an open secret. If you walk around with your eyes closed, you won't see any miracles. If you walk around aware that they could happen at any moment, you see them at every moment. And I know, having taken care of children with genetic problems, one little gene that's not right, and that can kill you. And we have 20,000 genes, and they all work perfectly for 80 to 100 years in most people. And from those genes, there are several million chemical reactions that happen perfectly in everybody's body for 80 to 100 years. There's no mechanic or scientist or inventor that could make a machine that's like that. So that's been my spiritual journey about miracles, is rather than saying I don't see it, but my eyes aren't open, I like to keep looking for them, because there seem to be happening all the time, and certainly in our own lives too, not just other people's lives. So that's my sharing. Let's we want in about 10 minutes to take any questions that, if there are people in the audience, they want to ask questions. But if you want to comment on each other's presentations or ask each other questions, this is the time. Anybody?
I don't know, I had asked the question earlier about Chaplain Ken, about chaplains being maybe a broader faith. If you could explain a little bit more. I'd always assumed that a chaplain was a very narrow calling, and I think I'm hearing you kind of bust my myth.
Well, I'm good at tearing stuff up. So, a lot of times people think that a chaplain, you don't have to be a preacher to be a chaplain. Let me put it that way. A chaplain's job, even, and I learned this when I was going through the academy at the police department to become a chaplain, that the chaplain job is not to go out and proselytize anybody, to try to convert anybody. The chaplain's job is to be there for support, whether it's spiritual support, emotional support. I like to call us as spiritual psychologists. That's my own little definition of it. But now there are some of my buddies, some of my friends that's pastors. They won't make good chaplains, because their thing is, I'm going into the room and I'm going to preach Jesus. Well, you preach that on Sunday morning. But when a person, you have to know who you're dealing with. It's more of a psychological thing. And so now there are, by me being a chaplain, I know who I am. I know I'm a Christian. I'm so I don't you can't have transference on me, because I know who I am. But by me knowing who I am, and by me knowing the faith that I am, does not deter me from helping somebody. One of the main things I like to tell people, whether they're Buddhist or I remember talking to this one patient, and if I can recall, he was I think it was Buddhist. I forget what it was, and he was going through a situation, and I asked him, how is your faith, your belief, how is that helping you with what you're dealing with? And he paused for a moment, and he says, you know what? I really don't know. You know, I got him to thinking, you know, but at the same time, I wasn't there to tell him, well, you know, Jesus can heal you. I know Jesus can heal you, but that's not my position to tell him that. But so chaplains, we have to, you have to know, you have to be able to be very observant. The best quality of a chaplain is to listen, just to listen to, because if you take time to listen, they'll tell you everything. You know, if you want to hear me preaching a sermon, hear me hooping and hollering, come to St. Mark or Broad Street on Sunday morning in San Francisco. You'll get a good show then. But my job as a chaplain is to listen to them and let them tell me what's going on with them. And sometimes they're Christians. Sometimes it could be something as simple as asking me to pray for them. You know, sometimes you'd be surprised some of the things that done come up, some stuff that done happen in childhood that now they're able to talk about. So that's pretty much where it's at.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If you don't mind, I wanted, you know, I don't have a question for you, David, but I do have a thought that came up after listening to you about, you know, miracles and, you know, growing up with a couple of parents who really, what I observed is they didn't have miracles in their lives. And so it became something of a miracle desert. And as I grew up, I very much, even though you know, like I said, I don't know that I can recall observing big miracles, but I almost became like the opposite of being very open, kind of like you said, you know, being open, having my eyes open, being questioning, loving the what I observe, where I'm at in the world, this ability to have hope for a miracle. And my dad would say, you know, I really love your attitude. You know, and I kind of took that as, you know, that was to me a really great compliment, even though he couldn't find it in himself, he observed it in me. And so when I, you know, hear what you were saying, it made me really tonight just kind of realize how much I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, you know, if you want to believe in it or you want to look into it, and you start looking for times in which it has happened, you'll start to see these unexplained things that happen in people's lives that can really enrich them. My heart is strengthened when I hear a story from a person of faith who tells me when something miraculous happens and how it changed them or made them less fearful or more confident in their future or less worrisome. When I find those two things happening, it's very rewarding, but I find it happening in people who are looking for it or willing to experience it. I've got a lot of my friends who just don't see it life that way at all. And they're nice people, they're good-hearted. They just haven't been raised or educated in this to look at the world through that kind of lens. Doesn't mean they're not awesome people. It just means that their lens doesn't see these things that I see more often. But I also find that when I talk with them and I share with them my stories, they might think I'm a little nuts, but it at least opens their mind to consider, well, maybe there's something to that after all. Who knows? But it's always nice when folks are looking for things like that.
Thank you,
Can
Pastor.
I say something right quick?
Yeah.
We talking about miracles, and then we also talking about faith. There's a lyric in the song that says, it's a gospel song that says it takes faith to step out on nothing and believe that something is there. And so that's when you got that mindset. It don't take faith for me to sit in this chair because I know the chair gonna hold me up, but it takes faith for me to believe that a person that's dealing with a cancerous situation, that God can miraculously heal that person. And if he don't, sometimes you got to have, I call it the if not faith, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faith in the Bible. How they told this king, our God is going to deliver us, but if he not, I'm not going to bow down. If he don't do it, I'm not going to bow down to it. So sometimes your faith just have to be resolved and saying, if God does it, cool. But if he don't do it, he has something better for me, even if it means leaving this world. So that's what it is.
There's times that when I go to a hospital and I pray with folks, I try to blend both the possible miraculous with the real. I'll talk with a person, I'll give God praise, I'll ask for God to bless the situation, that God will bless the doctors and the nurses who are caring for the patient, that God would keep them attentive to their needs. Oftentimes, I was in a hospital just a couple of days ago, and the nurse attendant was there, and I prayed that God would bless the nurse attendant and what he was doing to provide care, not just for this patient, but other patients as well. And then say, God, where they can't succeed, I pray that you will succeed. But in whatever it is that we do, we pray that we will bring you glory and honor, knowing that the life that we have is a gift. And so trying to do a little bit of both, because sometimes, none of us gets out of here alive. Right? None of us gets out of here alive. We're all going to die. And so you don't want to give false hope. I remember once I went and did one of the very first times I was in a hospital as an ordained minister. I walked in to see a church member, Pepping Antonio. And so I went to see him, and the doctor was coming out of the room, and he stopped me. He says, "Are you the preacher?" And I said, "Well, I guess." And he goes, "Listen, Pepping has to have a hernia operation, and he's scared witless. You have to calm him down, because if you don't, we're concerned that the surgery may not be successful. You have to make him feel as if God or your spiritual force," because he didn't say God, "your spiritual doohickey is gonna help him." And so I walked in scared witless. What on earth am I going to possibly say? And I held his hand and I prayed with him and his mother. And I said, "Lord, we pray that you will calm Pepping down, letting him remember and know that he belongs to you. All the ways in which you've cared for Pepping throughout his life, you're now caring for him in this scary situation." And we pray. And so I had some oil that I got from someone, and I anointed his head with it. And when we left in prayer, he seemed at peace. I saw him after the surgery, and the doctor said, "Whatever it is you said was perfect." The surgery was a 100% success, and the Pepping who went into the surgery was a different Pepping when he came out. And so there's something to the mental, the emotional power of prayer, I think that helps. And where we don't know the answer to the prayer, God knows how to take that in that situation when necessary. And if God wanted Pepping to live, Pepping would live, and that's what happened. Sorry to keep talking.
Oh, thank you, Bo. That's very, very helpful, I think, to all of us. Well, now it's time to take some questions, but it's not really a separate section of the Exploring the Sacred, because the questions are right on this exact same point that we're already talking about. The first question is, do miracles lead to faith? Anybody want to take that on?
I believe it does. I believe it. Think about it this way. If I know something, if I'm not sure something gonna work, and I try it and it does work, then I'm going to have a little bit more, I guess, faith in it. I'm going to have a little bit more belief in it. So I do believe that, and I do believe God will use a miracle to bring somebody to Him. I believe that. You don't have to be a Christian to get a miracle. You don't have to be. You don't have to know God for God to perform a miracle in your life. He can use that as the avenue to draw you to Him. So I do believe it leads to faith. But that's just my opinion.
That's a really interesting point, Ken. In my experience, the whole healing thing is a triangle, and everybody doesn't have to have faith in God. So if part of the triangle is the patient and the other part is the physician, if one of them has faith in God, that really that's a good situation. That will really work, because that kind of power comes through on the human level from one of the, somebody in that situation understanding the relationship of what's happening to God's love for us and God's compassion for us and God's guidance, wanting to teach us lessons. But it's a triangle, and sometimes the doctor doesn't have any faith, but the patient does. And I think that Pastor Bo's experience here, he's a new pastor. He goes in, he's wondering, what in the heck can I say? But he gives it over to God. The patients feel that. They definitely feel that they're being held in some hands that are not seen. And that's a situation where healing can happen. One of the things that I've heard discussed is that miracles are not the same as magic. So magic is when you want to show somebody that you have a power, and you do something and it produces an unexpected result. That can be done with smoke and mirrors. That doesn't have to be God. But what God does is not the same as those kind of magic tricks and finding the right parking place could be God, but it could also be, just knowing the parking lot. So anyway, I'm very much resonating with what you guys are saying. And it seems as though to me that the miracles are like the fruit that are hidden on the tree behind the leaves. So if you don't look, you say, well, that tree is just full of leaves. But if you already know it's a fruit tree, then you're not going to just look from the outside. You're going to put your hand in and push the leaves aside and find the miracle, find that fruit.
I'd like to add that, do miracles always lead to faith? And I would say miracles can lead to faith, but there's this moment in which a person has to decide whether they're going to step out in faith to believe something that is happening. And my brothers had a difficult time believing about my mom. Interesting story. I have a friend of mine who, the Oklahoma City bombing, he was supposed to have been in the building, in the Murrah building, doing some legal work. But as he said, I've never missed work. His wife came home and sobbing because she knew that he had just died in the blowing up of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. And she walks into the bedroom, and there he is asleep. And she wakes him up, and he goes, what? And she goes, what are you doing here? He goes, oh my gosh, I overslept. And so for a while, he certainly did believe that God, there was this thing called God that he didn't believe in anymore. That suddenly he did. But, that type of devotion began to wane after a while. And so sometimes a miracle can lead to great faith. Sometimes it's a temporary thing, and sometimes it's a forever thing. But there's something about us. There's an agent of change that we have to somehow grasp, I think, that miraculous, and say, well, so then what does this now mean for me?
Thank you. We have another question. When healing doesn't happen and it turns people away from God, is that a test from God or is it something else? And there's a similar question. We can't really explain why two people in a similar situation, one dies and one doesn't. It seems like it might be kind of a test from God as to faith. So anybody want to, this is about tests of faith, I guess. Does God test us? There's some other reason that things happen?
I believe, well, I don't believe God tests us. I know he doesn't tempt us. But I do believe he will allow some things to happen in your life. This, for you to go. A lot of times we hear people say, I want God to increase my faith. Lord, increase my faith. Well, in order for him to increase your faith, you got to go through something. If I've been working out for the last 4 or 5 months. For me to build these biceps I got now, I have to go through something, lift them the strength. And sometimes it ain't always easy. So I do believe that God allow us to go through things. Now, as far as him, somebody may ask the question, well, why did he heal this person but didn't heal that person? I have no idea. I don't know the mind of God. I don't know why God does what he does. The Bible tells us that his thoughts are so much higher than our thoughts. But whatever, it could be a reason why. Only he know that. But how does that look to the outside person? How does that look? It looks like God has favorites. It looks like God has his picks and chooses. But that's not always the case. Personally, I think that God is in control of everything. And if it's his will, his divine will to heal, he will heal. But if it's not his divine will, it won't. Now, he can use that time also. I've seen it to where a person that was getting ready to die, and they were supposed to die, and the doctor gave them a couple of days. They lasted for maybe a couple months or even longer than that. And I believe God was even showing faith in that to give the family time to get ready and get prepared for eventually what was going to happen. So, but as far as the answer, I can't answer whether or not God is testing the person's faith in that. I just do think that if you want your faith has to be, you want your faith increase, there's some things you're gonna have to go through. You're gonna have to go through some storms, and you're gonna have to go through some things. But that does not mean you go through them by yourself. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Ken.
I'm not a clergy, but I kind of agree in regards to, in my personal perspective, is I don't see God as being somebody who's testing us. In the Old Testament, if we remember Abraham's story, right? And there was he was going to sacrifice his son. And, that was what we would consider kind of that test of faith, right? But, in modern times, there's not like you said, God is overseeing. There's this, perhaps even humans have our way of behaving. Why would God have involvement of every minute of every day, including parking spots, right? There's just, with 8 billion people on the planet, we have choices, we have decisions, we have faith choices, we have will, we have free will. Some people might argue that we don't have free will, but I don't, in my personal perspective, I don't think that it's a challenge or a test from God.
And I totally agree. And Pastor Bo said something that kind of correlates to what you're saying. When you brought up the Abraham, pretty much, how when God had wanted him to sacrifice Isaac, and was that a test? But if you notice, before they even got to that mountain, Abraham had told the servants, "Y'all stay here while we go up, and we are coming back." So Abraham had to have some kind of faith that no matter what happened up on that mountain, Mount Moriah, he had to have some kind of faith to know that him and Isaac was coming back. Whether or not God allowed it to go through, I don't know if he believed that God was going to slay him and raise him up. I don't know. But he had some type of faith before they got there. And he told his servants, y'all stay here because we're coming back. And I think Pastor Bo said something. It's something on the inside of us, that drives that. So I totally agree.
I think too.
I,
Oh, go
I
ahead,
went
Dr. Bo.
I went and spoke with an anti-theist. We had a conversation in his living room. And an atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in God. An anti-theist doesn't think you should either, right? And so he was angry, and his parents were there, and this guy was about 20, and his parents were about 40, and his mom and his stepdad. And the kid told me why he doesn't believe in God. He said, when I was 12 years old, my daddy got cancer. And I prayed to God that God would heal my daddy because I wanted him to be in my life. And God didn't, and he died. And so I don't believe in God because my daddy died. And who would take their daddy from a 12-year-old boy? Now he's talking to me in front of his mother and his stepdad, and they're looking to me for an answer. And like Ken says, I don't know. I don't know why God would heal some people, but not your dad, because obviously your dad is important. You should grow up with a dad. You've grown up with a stepdad. I'm sorry this has happened to you. I think sometimes we want answers for every little thing that happens to us. And truthfully, I don't know the answer to it. And maybe somebody does. Maybe if we climb a mountain and speak with a guru who could explain it. But, I don't even think the guru would have the mind of God. Only God does. And we plod along as best as we can. I knew a minister that I used to work for, and she didn't pray for healings because sometimes God didn't heal, and she didn't want to be put in an awkward situation. And I say, well, sometimes you just got to do it. And, because it's not up to me for them to be healed. It's up to God who decides who is healed and who isn't. And stepping out in faith is kind of what we're called to do. And then being okay with the answer. What, Garth Brooks, remember that song? He thanked the Lord for unanswered prayers. Because he was talking about, when he would pray for something and he didn't get it, it turned out to be the best decision for him. We can't always know what our future is going to hold, and we have to trust that God knows more about our future than we do, and live with that. And be okay with it.
Thank you.
One thing when I talk to faith, I've had, because God knows how many people have left this world in front of my eyes and how many people I've done, I had to pray for them. But one thing I noticed that helps a lot of families is I tell people all the time that when the Christian or a person that loves God pray for healing, they're gonna get healed. But all healing is not on this side of heaven. Healing may be on the other side. And that seems to bring some type of relief or some type of acceptance, into the situation. Yes, they see mama suffering right now, but they know mama's gonna go on the other side, but she's won't be suffering anymore. So it depends on how they take it.
For me, in my own experience, it also the understanding or the acceptance has to do with why are we here in the first place? Because there's a part of me that wants to just be successful and happy and not have anything happen to me or my children or my wife or and yet as you live, you lose your grandparents and you lose your parents and you just start to see, well, wait a minute, are all those things tests? Are those things, are you being punished for something, or are you being tested, or is this part of a normal cycle that has been you might even say miraculously put together for us to learn how to be a human being. And so, we're so focused on success in this world, that we don't want to be a failure by getting sick or dying or having someone in our family that we can't help when they're ill. But so I have seen so many people blossom in the time that their body was given out. And I know, Chaplain Ken, you've probably seen this a lot too, and probably everybody here has seen it. But I'm not so sure I want to live to be 500. I would much rather get to be a nice person and an acceptable human being that is acceptable to God, and God will say, "Oh yeah, he's my child. I recognize him. He's trying to be like me." And that's, I think, a more attainable goal than never getting sick and never dying. And I think we've kind of mixed that up in our society where, success is not getting sick and success is not dying, because it's a hopeless goal. And the only thing is, I can say that, but you don't tell somebody who's dying that. They have to experience whatever they're going to experience. But I think that for those of us that are there with them, that, if we can convey that what's happening doesn't make the person any less a child of God or any less of a friend or a mother or father or one of our children, someone in our congregation, they're not less. They're that same person. They're that wonderful miracle that they were when they were first born. And that we appreciate them and what we can learn from their life now while they're with us. Those are things that I think are not explicit enough for us. They're not said. I had a weird experience when I was just a new student doctor. I hadn't even graduated from medical school, and I had to do in those early years, you have to do like a complete history, everything about the person and their family and everything about them, and write it up as well as examine them. And so I was so slow, it took me a whole day to do this. One guy who was in the hospital, and he was a professional, he was a dentist. And so when I went back to see him the next day, and I'd already spent a whole day with him doing this tedious set of questions and examination and everything that I had to write up, I started talking with him, and he said, Doc, what do you think? Should I really go ahead with this surgery that I'm in for? And I'm going, I haven't even graduated yet. You don't realize how absolutely ignorant I am. I have no knowledge that you can tap into. And yet I've never forgotten that guy, because just hanging out with him made him understand that someone else cared about him. And that was more important than having a diploma. I've always remembered that. And I think if that was more part of our society, if that was more part of people's experience, we could all be doctors. We could all be chaplains. We could all be social workers. Everybody runs away when people are suffering. But if you don't run away, it's almost like Jesus is there. If you just hang in there with a person, that's when they experience that godliness. Anyway, I'm getting overwrought now. So we have about 10 minutes. I don't know if there are any other questions. Oh, somebody asked, what do you think about near-death experiences? Anybody want to comment on that?
For some reason, I have met several people who've had them. And I remember in seminary, I had a classmate who died 2 or 3 times. I can't remember what he'd said. And he was weird. He was odd, but he had this confidence in life and death that he was no longer afraid of death. I have spoken to several people who've had I have a church member here who's had a near-death experience. She has absolutely no fear of death. She was in the operating room, she rose above, she saw her body, she was above it. And the voice said, I need you here I need you to wait here and not there. And just the realization that there was more to this life than just our bodies has given her a sense of confidence, to the point where, oh, I know what I'm talking about. She's a lovely person, but her experiences calmed her nerves. So, and I read stories and books and in Guideposts magazine, all that stuff. And, people are changed by the experience. Now, people will poo-poo them and say, oh, that's just the light they were going to, is the birth canal light as a baby. I don't remember anything below 8 years old. But people try to explain away these miraculous things, but for the people who've been changed by them, it's very real. It's a testimony. I believe in them. I have no reason not to believe in them, and it certainly strengthens my faith.
Thank you, Pastor Bo. Anybody else?
3 weeks ago, I was actually in Israel, about a mile from the Gaza border. And, and I don't think of, having a near-death experience, except that we were hearing the cannon fire, and there was a rocket that came up over our head being shot from Gaza. I took a picture of it, and I've had friends ask me, how can you feel safe going to a war zone? How could you, weren't you afraid? Weren't you scared that you were going to die or get killed? And I said, calmly, I'm not. I think I have this, I don't know if it's faith or this idea that I needed to be there to see with my own eyes, because there was so much stuff on the news, both good and bad, and you don't know what to believe, but I can believe my eyes, and I can believe what I hear and what I see and what I observe, and that's what I needed to do. So whether it was a near-death experience, the rocket was exploded up in the air, so it didn't hit down, and we didn't have to worry about that. But I also know that it was something I had to do. And so I don't know, maybe people in the military, going to war have that same thought of, maybe it's my mission, and so it's something that's bigger than me.
Thank you, Diane.
I believe in it. I believe in near-death experience. I never had them before, but I did have an experience. And I told you all I was born with a twin brother, and it was kept from me for some years, but I didn't find out about it. I think I was 14, 15 years old. And the way I found out in Chicago was 3 nights. I'll never forget, 3 nights in a row. I dreamed I died and went to heaven. It was the same identical dream. And then on the 3rd night, I remember telling my mom, I says, I dreamed I died and went to heaven. And I told her I didn't see no angels, I didn't see no pearly gates, I didn't see no white clouds, I didn't see none of that. But I told her I saw this beautiful garden. And in this garden were the kids. And I said, then I saw myself standing back, waving and smiling at myself. And that's how it all came out about the twin. I believe God was showing me him, but not just that, he was showing me heaven, So I've heard several people talk about near-death experience, and each one I've heard and talked to, even one here at the hospital, their life has been totally changed, and they have no fear of death. And that's how I feel right now. After I had the experience, what God showed me at the age of 15, of course, my mom got me out of Chicago because the street gangs were trying to recruit me and sent me up to Yountville in the Napa Valley with my granddad. But I have no fear of death because God showed me. I know where I'm going when I leave. I don't know when. I ain't trying to rush it, but I do know that you don't have to tell me I'm going to die. I know that. I know this body goes back to the ground, but I know the soul goes on to be with the Lord. So people I've talked to, their life has been changed because of it. And so I believe it. I believe in those. And they can come up with any type of scientific anything they want to try to explain it. You know, believe what you want to believe, but I believe that they actually exist and actually happen, and it actually helps people.
Thank you, Ken. Anyone else? Well, we are about 3 minutes away from the end of our time for this meeting. And it's just been wonderful. I'm glad it's recorded. And I think it's going to be, Serene, isn't it going to be on the Facebook account for the recording will be on our Interfaith Council Facebook page
So it'll be on our YouTube channel.
or YouTube channel. Okay.
Yes. Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento.
And,
And
we-
it should be up by Friday.
and that is available, where would audience members or panelists be able to find the YouTube channel?
So go to youtube.com, search for Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento, then go to videos, and you'll see all of our past panel discussions as well as this one.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, sometimes it's good to end a time in which we've really shared what was in our hearts with the one that created that heart. So I'm wondering if somebody would like to offer a closing prayer for this exploring the sacred panel event.
Can Pastor David on? I can. Let's bow our heads. Father, we come to you. We thank you for this discussion. We thank you for this panel. We thank you, dear God, for those that was able to hear us on tonight. And we thank you, dear God, for not only being with us, but speaking through us. I believe, Lord, someone was helped on tonight. I'm asking, Lord, that you would continue to bless this council, bless the interfaith. And I'm asking right now in your divine name, Lord, that whatever we stand in the need of, that you would continue to supply it. I pray for healing for those that are sick. I pray, Lord, that you continue this touch right now, because, Lord, we know you are still in the blessing business. You're still in the healing business. So we give you all the praise, honor, and glory. We pray for traveling grace to get us back to our homes and destinations safely. We ask all this. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. And Serene, thank you. And thanks to the Interfaith Council of Greater Sacramento for sponsoring our evening tonight.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Travel in
Y'all take
peace.
care.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
And nice to meet all of y'all.
Yes. You too.
Very much.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.